Hi, everyone. Welcome to the conversation today. I see we have some folks joining. Go ahead and drop a yes into the chat if you can hear me okay. And we'll get started here quickly. So I respect everybody's time, but we might have a few more folks hopping on a little bit later. Can everybody hear me? Oh, yes, we got a yes. Thank you, Leslie. I see you. Okay, good. Well, I'm excited for the conversation today and really appreciate you all taking some time out of your afternoon to spend with me. Today, we're going to be talking about fear versus intuition and how to tell the difference. Well, first, we'll define what is fear, what is intuition, and why it matters, and how when we're experiencing pressure, stress, how this can impact how we show up, how we communicate, and why, and what we can do about it. All right. Before we get started, I want to start with a question, or before we get started, rather, with the content, and then I'll share a quick background on myself here in just a few. But my question for you is to think about during the conversation today: why do intelligent, capable people? Oh, I forgot. I want to record because some people couldn't be here, but they wanted to get their recording. So we're gonna. We got it. Okay. Okay. Hi, Craig. See you. Okay. Good. Why do intelligent, capable people like you and me still struggle sometimes to communicate, to make decisions, to show up the way that we would like when we feel pressure, when we feel stress, when we feel that hesitation? So that's what the conversation is about today. Because I'm sure we have all experienced these moments. I know I have, where we walk away from a conversation thinking, why couldn't I get my words in the moment? That's not what I wanted to say. Now I know what I would like to have said. Or sometimes we technically have the conversation, but really it's more like an interaction because we softened what we wanted to say. We didn't actually get the message across. And if you've ever made your point and then kept talking, this is over-explaining. And then sometimes we can tend to just avoid the conversation altogether. So feel free to drop a number in the chat, maybe 3, maybe 5, for however many of these experiences you can identify with. I know for me, it's a 5. I've experienced all of these. All right, so just so you know what to expect today, I like to know what to expect, so I'll share with you. I'm going to talk for probably about 35 minutes or so, and then I'll leave room for Q&A at the end. And I will be inviting you to, okay, I see some 5s. We've got some honest people in the conversation today, so that's good. So I'll leave room for Q&A at the end, and I'll be inviting you to share your feedback throughout as we go. So if you have a question, if you have a comment, go ahead and drop it into the chat. If you have an emoji you want to share, I'll be inviting you to do that. And then what we're going to cover today, the conversation is basically 3 parts. So first, we're going to talk about fear and intuition and how they're different, and why it matters, and what they can feel like and what they can look like in real life situations. And then we'll move into how this can impact our communication when we're having some stress, a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of fear, how that can impact how we show up. And then for the final part of the conversation, I'll leave you with a very simple, practical, not necessarily easy framework that you can use to help you better navigate those moments when we feel the pressure, when we feel the hesitation. But the good news about the framework is that, just like with anything, the more we practice, the more reps we get in, the better we get at it. Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. But first, real quick background on myself. My name is Amy Miller. I'm a leadership coach and hiring advisor. My background is in executive recruiting, and then I also have training in organizational psychology. And I've always been very curious by nature. I started researching psychology from a very young age because I was curious about why I was showing up or not showing up the way I was or wanted to, and how this was impacting my outcomes. And then working alongside leaders for over a decade in recruiting, and then later with the coaching, I'm witnessing what's happening in real time, working with leaders navigating these real life situations. And so the work that I teach is a culmination of my own lived experience and research, and the many years working alongside leaders navigating these stressful situations. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get started with fear versus intuition. And a question for you, you're welcome to share a yes in the chat if you like, or just keep it for yourself. But have you ever felt a hesitation, a pause? Maybe internally you're saying no, but you move forward anyway. So we're going to talk about why we do this. And I'm a writer. I love words. And so I will often look up a definition, even when I feel like I know the answer pretty clearly, or maybe I just want to have a deeper understanding. And I always learn something. And so that's what I did with fear and intuition years ago when I first started teaching this lesson. So if you look up the definition of fear, this is what you'll find: something along the lines of an uncomfortable emotion caused by a belief of what might happen, so that something is likely to cause a negative consequence of fear or pain, loss, something like that. So the word that you want to pay attention to with this definition is belief. Fear, by definition, is an uncomfortable emotion caused by a belief of something that might happen. So what does this tell you about fear? Does it mean that fear is necessarily always bad? No, but fear can escalate. Fear tends to tell a story. So fear absolutely serves a purpose. It can keep us safe, protected, and alive. It can alert us to, okay, you might want to prepare better for this. But what's happening when we feel this fear, it serves a purpose when we actually are in real physical danger. But what about when we're not? There's something that happens in the body psychologically, physiologically, where we're feeling this reaction, even when we're not in real physical danger. And so we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But first, what is intuition? So intuition, by definition, is immediate understanding, instant understanding without the need for conscious reasoning. This inner knowing, we can tend to call it a gut instinct, just something in my gut. But does that mean that intuition is magic? Not necessarily. I kind of think that it is. It feels like it, if we can learn to harness that intuition, not to necessarily give us the solution, give us the answer, but to guide our direction on where we need more information, where we want to get curious. And research consistently shows that, or supports that, intuition is pattern recognition and the brain's ability to synthesize enormous amounts of information in a split second, just instant. And so what kind of information? So we've all had, most likely, we've all had decades of experience up to this point. So this is a wealth of knowledge and information. And the brain can synthesize all of that. So we pick up on subtle inconsistencies in communication. Or, I've seen this pattern before and it didn't go well. So maybe I want to be a little cautious here. Maybe I want to prepare more. Maybe I don't want to go in this direction. Of course, those words that I'm using to articulate that signal right now, we don't have those words in the moment. We just have the signal. So the signal arrives first and then the explanation comes later, but not if we don't first acknowledge that signal. And this is where we can sometimes get ourselves into trouble. And what I mean by trouble is taking ourselves further from where we actually want to be. We can tend to override that signal also because we have the pressure in the moment. We have the fear. So that's the difference, by definition, between fear and intuition. And so now let's look at why this happens scientifically. Drop a hand raise in the chat, or yes, if you like, if you're familiar with Daniel Goleman, or if you've heard of amygdala hijacking. He does a lot of work on emotional intelligence. And so what's happening, he says, in the body when we're under stress is we shift into threat detection mode. And I see a yes. Thank you, Leslie. So when we are in real physical danger, it serves us to shift into threat protection mode. That's not the time to stop, to pause, to think about the different scenarios, the data, the information that we have. We want to get ourselves safe. If there's a car that's speeding toward us, we're not going to stop and logically consider why that might be happening. I have the right of way. What are you doing? No, we're going to get ourselves out of the way instantly. So this fear can absolutely serve a purpose. But how often are we in real physical danger? We might be in uncomfortable situations, but at work, in our career, sometimes in our personal life as well. When we feel this fear, we may not be in real physical danger, but then we can lose our lose access to our clearer thinking because the brain has shifted into threat detection mode. So for example, if we're preparing for a conversation that we think, may not go that well, a high stakes, difficult conversation, or if we think somebody doesn't approve of us and we're going into this leadership meeting, where we can start to feel the fear and we can lose our confidence because we can lose our access to our clear thinking. Then we can't get our words in the moment. And then we can start to tend to think, well, what is wrong with me? Why did I show up that way? But here's what's actually happening. And the fear, that sort of built-in response, it's not necessarily a problem, but if we have awareness around it, then that creates choices. And we'll talk about that here in a bit. So what can this look like in our work life, in organizations? So I have a few examples here of that fear story versus the observable facts. And I'll speak to one that I see a lot working with newer leaders stepping into bigger roles. And it's also something that more senior leaders have shared with me as well, that they have seen in their newer leaders. And it doesn't have to be leadership. It could be, anytime we're stepping into a role with greater responsibility. We were promoted into that position for a reason, but that doesn't mean that we have experience in executing on all of the responsibilities that we're now going to have in this new role. But newer leaders can feel like, they can feel that hesitation, that pause with a new project that they don't yet have experience in, for example. And that fear story can say, what, if I raise my hand and ask for help, they're going to think I'm not capable. They're going to wonder why they promoted me into this position. So do we follow that initial signal, that tightness, that resistance? And when I talk about signals, I invite you to pay close attention to what's happening in the body, because your body's, is it telling you I want to go forward or I want to go away? When we feel like we want to go away and we move forward anyway, that's a good example of overriding that signal. And we'll look at a couple of organizational examples here in a moment. But if we separate the fear story, they're going to think I'm not capable. Why? They're going to wonder why they promoted me into this role, from the actual facts. Well, I was promoted for a reason. My performance is strong, my experience is solid, and I'm driven I'm driven by others' success. So yes, I'm in this role for a reason. The facts are, the truth is, I don't have this particular skill set just yet because I haven't had that responsibility. So then if you follow the signal and you get curious about why you're feeling that resistance, and then you let yourself get curious, and then this helps you access clearer thinking. I need a resource. I can either follow the fear and say, I'm just going to get started right now because I'm feeling some pressure. I don't want to disappoint. I need to deliver. So I'm just going to start. And then 3 weeks down the line, you're feeling stuck and frustrated and you wonder why. Or you can follow the initial signal and then the information. You know what? I need a resource. Who in my network or within the organization has a resource that I can take, and instead of reinventing the wheel and hit the ground running. All right, so let's look at a hiring example. True story. And if you are leading a team and have ever participated in an interview process, or if you've been the candidate, you can probably relate to this scenario here. Oh, I forgot something very important on this next slide, or the last slide. So at the top here, I got this question the other day in a conversation. Okay, so we understand the fear story, we understand the gut signal, but how do we get over the fear? Well, you always want to acknowledge the emotion, whether it feels good or something that you don't want to feel. I don't like to classify emotion or judge emotions as bad, because it's all information. So we want to acknowledge the fear, observe it, but then we have the ability to choose our focus. So do you choose to follow the fear story, or do you choose to acknowledge the fear and focus back on that initial signal that you got, and then your intuition, and then guide your next steps from there? And I'll look forward to feedback either now, you can drop it into the chat, or as we go, or if there's questions later on, if that's clear, because that's important. All right, so hiring example. So let's say you're a leader and you're hiring for, you're a second line leader, you're hiring for a first line leader. So you're leading leaders and you're hiring for a leader to lead your individual contributor team. And you got this candidate who checks out on paper. They've got the experience, and all of the other members of the hiring team, your leadership peers, they feel like the candidate can do the job. They feel like this is a good candidate. And then, but you have a pause, you have a hesitation. It's just a feeling. You might classify it as a gut instinct, but it's a pause. If you pay attention to what it actually feels like, it feels like tightness, or it likely feels like resistance. But then that fear story comes in. Well, I don't want to be difficult. I don't want to rock the boat. And then there's also, everybody else thinks that this person is a good qualified candidate. So what's wrong with me? What's my problem? We can tend to second guess ourselves as part of that fear story. And then you add the element of pressure. Okay, well, this team has been without a leader for 2 months now. I'm doing 2 jobs right now. I'm really stressed. You know what? I'm sure they can do the job. I'm going to go ahead and extend an offer. So then what happened, true story, a year later, 90% of the team was not making their quota. Morale was down. And if 90% of the team's not making the quota, how is this now impacting the organization from a revenue standpoint? And then how's this impacting customers? And then how's this impacting the stress of the second line leader who made the hire and now has to move the wrong hire out of their role, and now they're doing double duty again, their role, this other person's role, and guess what? They have to hire again. True story. And so what could this have looked like if that manager had heeded their intuition? Now, intuition, of course, is not handing you the answer saying, okay, this is a solution. Your gut says no, so just pass on this candidate. That can tend to feel like and maybe be viewed as sort of reactive thinking. But your intuition is an invitation of where to look and to get curious and dig deeper. So a different way that this scenario could have looked like, I've got to pause here. I know everybody else is high on this candidate. I know that the facts and the information say that he's got the relevant experience and it should be fine. But why am I having this pause? So pause and get curious and take a moment to sit with that uncomfortable questioning kind of emotion. So then you can access more clarity and learn, this is my concern. I've identified I need more information here. And so then that can guide you to another step. Maybe you need to ask a specific interview question. Or maybe you want to add an additional interview step to give the candidate an opportunity to see if they can overcome that hesitation. And when you do that, does it hurt a little bit? Yes. If you add another interview step and delay the hire another 2 weeks, maybe. Or maybe you learn, and maybe they are able to overcome that hesitation, and then you move forward. Or maybe you learn, you know what, my uncertainty about this candidate is now increased and I've got to start over again. So then maybe we've got another month or 2. So none of that feels very good, but it hurts a lot less than a year later having to make the hire again and rebuild back up the team and the morale. So that's an organizational example of how fear versus intuition can, and the practical framework that I'll share, can apply and impact an organization. But what about those seemingly smaller moments? This is another example, another true story. I'll go ahead and share. This is my own personal example. Drop a yes into the chat if you have ever said yes when you really mean no, and you walk away from a situation almost immediately thinking, why did I commit myself to that? Why did I say that? Yeah, definitely a yes for me. So why do we do this? Why do we say yes when we really mean no, when we really want to say no, when our body is wanting to move away, when we feel that tightness, when we feel that resistance? Why do we move forward anyway? Because we want to be liked. We want harmony. We want approval. We don't want to disappoint people. These are our real human needs. And so we don't want to have that uncomfortable conversation where we have to say no, or even, we have to think about it. But what happens when we say yes and we really mean no? We didn't have that boundary setting conversation. We didn't have that difficult conversation that maybe would have taken 30 seconds. Does that discomfort stay there in that situation? The other person's not uncomfortable because they're getting their needs met. You said yes, but that discomfort stays with you, and then it can start to grow, because when we move forward, when we don't want to, we're essentially going against ourselves, ignoring what that wealth of information that the brain is synthesizing that gave us that signal, that gave us that pause. When we override that, we can start to hesitate moving forward more often. We can start to question ourselves. So what does that happen? Does that discomfort go away? No, it stays with you. So then we can walk away from that interaction, replaying the conversation, thinking, why did I say yes? This is really what I meant to say. And then we can start to even maybe feel some resentment, like, wait a minute, this person is close to me. They know what's happening. Or maybe it's a colleague that you work closely with, and they know how many projects you have on your plate and that you're very helpful. So you likely say yes anyway. So then you maybe start to feel some resentment, like, why do they even ask? And so then what can happen is, and you can drop a yes or hand raise if you want, if this has ever happened for you, where you're trying to execute on a project that is pretty simple. It should maybe take you an hour, but now it's taking you 2 hours, or it's taking you substantially longer because your brain is back here. You're working with a distracted focus. It's trying to solve this problem. It's replaying the conversation. And now think about if you're doing that, if other people on your team are doing that, how much this can drain these unresolved internal conflicts and those conversations that are being delayed or avoided altogether, or those boundaries that are not being set, how much this can slow us down. I'm going to drop an article into the chat here, and you can copy it and save it for later. Hey, Pat, thanks for hopping on. See you. Okay. This is just a short blog post in UC Berkeley, but I think it's great. And there's actually a lot of data on this, so you may have seen or read something similar. But this article is talking about the impact of external interruptions. So it talks about how research shows if you are working on a project and you've built up some momentum, you're getting more done with less effort. It's going to take you less time to complete the task because you've built up that momentum. But then you get pinged with an interruption for a meeting or an email or something like that, and you shift your focus. Well, it takes that task switching takes time and effort on your brain to work back up to the pace that you were at previously. And this article says that depending on the level of complexity of the task, it can take anywhere from 7 to 24 minutes to get back up to where you were previously. So if you think about how many times we're task switching throughout the day, we can end up losing a lot of valuable time. That's why I'm very stringent about my time blocks. This is my uninterrupted, protected focus time for this project. And then I'll switch to this. And I highly encourage leaders to do the same, and to encourage your team to have those protected time blocks. But for the conversation, what we're talking about today are those internal distractions, those internal interruptions when we're replaying the conversation. And also think about, I think that was the next slide. Think about what your face is doing when you're replaying a conversation, or when you're having the conversation that you need to have, and you're maybe stressed or unhappy with the situation. What your face is likely doing. Are you more or less approachable? So when we're carrying around these unresolved conflicts and these internal conflicts, this shows up outwardly, whether we are aware of it or not, or whether we intend for what we're carrying inside to show up. I'll give you just share a quick sort of funny story. I was on vacation, which I'm sort of unique, weird maybe, in that vacation stresses me out. I like to be focused on my goals, and maybe I didn't want to go on this particular vacation. It was in Hawaii, and it was a work thing. And so I show up there. Actually, so I come down the stairs. There's this beautiful resort, and I'm scanning the room to find my team. And yes, I was probably feeling some internal stress because I felt like, I had other things to focus on rather than be on this sort of like forced vacation. And this resort was so beautiful. I was taking it in, and I'm looking around, and I'm focused, I'm thinking, and I saw this woman across the room who looked so angry. And I thought, oh my God, she's scary. She's off-putting. Probably you can tell it was me. I was looking in a mirror, and this is what my face was doing just when I was deep in thought, and probably also experiencing some stress. So what we carry shows up. Maybe not as bad for you as it does for me. All right, so we talked about the organizational cost of unresolved conflict and those conversations that we've been avoiding. All right, so we talked about fear, how the definition, what it can look like, what it can sound like, how it can escalate and tell those stories. And we talked about intuition and how they can both impact us on a personal level, how we show up, and across and within organizations. So now we're going to talk about how stress and pressure and fear can impact our communication and how we show up. So let's say if you've ever been, of course, I've done a lot of interviewing in my recruiting experience. But if you've ever been interviewing a candidate and it takes them 15 minutes to answer a question, we know that they're uncomfortable, right? So think about, a time where maybe you made your point, you answered a question, but then you just kept talking. So this is over explaining. So when we do this, is it because we are trying to help the other person understand better? Or is it because we're trying to make ourselves comfortable? We're trying to, when we're uncomfortable, when we're feeling the stress, we're trying to manage the other person's perception of us. And sometimes this fear and discomfort can influence us to avoid a conversation altogether. Or, like maybe you notice, okay, my boss has been acting a little bit off. So first, before you can even articulate those words, you feel a feeling, you feel a signal. And that's an invitation to dig deeper there. But then the fear can say, this is going to be uncomfortable. I'm just going to let that go. But then what happens to that discomfort? It's going to continue growing and then can become an internal conflict that's not resolved and further a distraction. And sometimes we can soften our feedback so that maybe we have to give potentially difficult or not so great feedback to a direct report, and we're concerned about how they're going to receive the feedback. So we soften it so much that the message doesn't even really get relayed to them. They don't even know. We don't get our message across. Okay, I'm going to drop another article into the chat here. This one is an HBR read, and so if you don't have an HBR membership, I think that we get 5. I do, but I think you get 5 free downloads. So I recommend checking this one out. I love this article, and I even love the title. It's called when you start to find employee requests irritating. And the article is talking about when your reaction feels maybe disproportionate, not wrong, but bigger, your reaction to somebody's simple request, for example, like the quick yes example that I gave, and I'll walk through this with that example. So it's an invitation to pay attention when you feel a bigger reaction to a simple request that maybe somebody else, it wouldn't bother them. Doesn't mean your reaction or your feeling is wrong, but it's something that you want to pay attention to. And we'll talk about why. So in this article, the researchers discuss 4 human needs, they say, that show up in the workplace dynamic that we want to pay closer attention to under stress, but they're human needs. So they're going to show up everywhere in our personal life and also in the workplace. And they are safety. We talk about psychological safety, of course, in the workplace, the need to feel like you can speak up, push back, ask clarifying questions, and belonging. This is also related to self-determination theory, which also is related to motivation. We want to feel connected to, related to, like we belong and like we feel cared about by the people that we work with. And then love and meaning. So meaning, we want to feel a meaningful connection to the work that we're doing. So this article, the researchers are suggesting that when we feel that sort of disproportionate reaction, or you might call it a triggering moment, this is an invitation to get curious about why you're feeling that, why that's showing up, because they're saying that it's pointing to one of these core needs not being met. And when the beautiful thing and really empowering thing about getting curious about our feelings, especially the uncomfortable ones, I like to say to focus on the frustration and to sit with that discomfort, is that we can then learn what it is we need, and then we can give ourselves what we need, and that's then we feel better. And also, the more you pay attention to how you're feeling, then the better you understand yourself. So you increase your emotional intelligence, your self-awareness, and the better you understand yourself, of course, the better you can understand others and your team. So you, in turn, naturally elevate your social awareness as well. So I'll just share it real quick with the example. I noticed when my friend asked for my help with the project, it also happened to be at a time where I had a lot of change happening, a lot of things going on that needed my attention, and I was under a lot of stress. And we were close, so he knew that. And after I said the quick yes, I sat with that feeling, and I just noticed I felt frustrated, I felt irritated, felt resentful, and I got curious about why. And then I realized that this is not the first time that this sort of pattern has happened with this friend. So which of these needs was not being met for me? I think it was belonging, because I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel like my needs were cared about. Okay, so what does this awareness tell me? about myself. So first, that signal was telling me something about myself and or the friendship. Doesn't mean we're not friends anymore, but it does mean I need to place a contained boundary around my time in this situation. And then what does that do? Helps me feel empowered because, moving forward, even though I overrode myself in that moment, I'm less likely to make that same mistake again because I went back, I did my after action review, I understand myself more deeply, why I had that triggering emotion. So anyway, we'll move on, but I think that's a great article and highly recommend checking it out. Okay, so for the conversation today, we won't, of course, have time to complete this exercise, but I'm sharing a self-reflection exercise if you want to. It looks like it put it in a few different chats, so hopefully you're able to grab that. And I invite you to reflect on this later and think about a conversation that you maybe have been avoiding or a boundary that keeps getting your attention that you would like to set. And then think about that signal that's showing up initially, and then consider the fear story and what you're potentially afraid might happen if you have that conversation. And then what would responding intentionally look like? So this can help you prepare for and put into action what we're talking about today. Which brings us to the last part of the conversation, the practical framework that I promised you. It is 4 steps, and it can take 30 seconds. It can take 1 minute. It can take 5 minutes. You can go through it in 1 or 2 minutes, in real time, in a real life situation, and then give yourself a little bit more time to reflect on it, and then again follow up with the last part. So very simple. We'll walk you through. Not necessarily easy, but it does get easier. And even though there's always room for improvement, so we never want to judge ourselves if we didn't show up in the way that we wanted to. And just the other day, I had a stressful conversation, which I probably should have taken some time to prepare for. But I was feeling that stress, so I just took action and went into the conversation, and didn't go very well. And then afterwards, I went back to the framework here, and I identified which step I missed. I said, aha, okay, here's what you could have done and how that conversation might have gone differently. Okay, so what is the first step in the framework? This is when you're in an uncomfortable situation, you feel stress. We can feel that fight or flight, like I want to vacate this conversation. The first step, or I want to react defensively and defend myself. Nothing is wrong with any of these emotions; they're natural. The first step is to pause. Just pause when you feel that resistance, when you feel that tightness, when you feel that uncomfortable sensation. Pause. Now, how long does this pause take? 1 inhale, like a half a second. And then the second step is to acknowledge. I'm feeling tightness. I'm feeling resistance. How long does that step take you? So you're pausing and then you're acknowledging the feeling. That takes an exhale. So basically 1 second to complete the first part of the framework. And then the third part is to clarify. And when I say clarify, I mean you're clarifying within yourself what you're feeling and what you need. So, and then what does that look like in real time? Because again, we can't say, okay, pause this moment. I need some time to practice my framework right now. Obviously, we're not going to be able to do that, but you can cheat a little bit while you're clarifying. So for example, okay, I feel some hesitation. You feel a signal, you pause, you acknowledge it. I'm feeling some tightness, some resistance, and then clarify, okay, why am I feeling like this? Or what is it that I need in this moment? So outwardly, what you're doing in that moment, you can buy yourself a little bit of time and cheat a little bit by paraphrasing what the other person said. Oh, you're thinking Saturday would be a good day for me to help you with this project, or somebody gives you negative feedback in a very direct way that doesn't feel very good. Okay, so what I'm hearing is X. So you're giving your brain, we talked about the amygdala hijacking, a moment to come back down from that fear-based response where you can't access your words or you want to react instead of respond. And that's just the time that you need, just a couple seconds to access your clearer thinking. Now, you might need a little more time after the framework to fully access it, like I did when I went through, okay, why did I have that triggering response? But in real time, this can look like so after you clarify, then you lead. And that means with your next step, which is maybe a clarifying question. Or in the quick yes example that I gave, that could look like, okay, Saturday, you know what, I would love to help, but I've got a lot on my plate. Let me just check my calendar and I'll follow back up with you. I didn't override myself. Yay. And then I feel better leaving that situation. And then I can take a little more time to get curious about what's going on with me and why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. And do I really have time for this? And then I can follow back up and further lead and say, either, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do that. I would love to, or I've got a lot on my plate right now. I definitely want to help, but just give it like a contained window. I can do this day from this time to this time. So I still didn't override myself. And what happens when we override ourselves, when we don't pause, acknowledge, clarify, and lead, and maybe you have practiced this probably in some scenarios without putting these terms on it. And then maybe there's experiences where you didn't practice this, and then later you leave, questioning yourself. When we override ourselves, though, that's when we can start to replay the conversation, and then we feel distracted. We're working with a distracted focus. So step number one, interrupt the automatic reaction with a pause, which can look like an inhale. Step two, you're acknowledging, okay, I feel this signal. And then you're clarifying, okay, what is it that I need? And then you are leading with your next step. So a couple quick examples of what this can look like. I'm just going to go pretty quickly through this one here. True story, coaching client came to me feeling stressed and kind of stuck on a project. And she said, I don't know why I can't make any headway with this project. I keep setting aside my focused, core focused time block. But 3 weeks later, I can't figure it out. And I said, okay, well, tell me the scenario. And I could immediately see where the challenge was and what was keeping her stuck. And it had nothing to do with her not being capable, intelligent, like we talked about with the opening question. But in that conversation, so she was given an initiative from a senior leader with a lot of autonomy. And in that moment, she needed more clarity on what the outcome goal was. But then some pressure and stress came in because he also said, be prepared for pushback on this. There's going to be pushback. Ugh. So then you have that stress. So then we can go into fight or flight mode, reaction mode. Okay, I'm just going to get started because there's a lot of pressure and I need to deliver. So that signal, which was confusion, which if we focus on that, get curious about that signal, I need more information. Before I execute on this project, I want to make sure we're aligned on the outcome goal. What is your specific outcome goal? So that conversation needed to happen, and it didn't happen because the amygdala hijacking thing happened. I'm feeling stress. I'm feeling pressure. So we were able to sort of zoom out, take a deep breath, and being that she had a lot of experience and autonomy for the project, she was able to focus in on her outcome goal and then execute on the project, and it worked out great. And then we already talked about the quick yes, what that would look like. So don't need to go through that one again. Okay, so returning to where we started, why do intelligent, capable people still sometimes struggle with communication, just like I did the other day, and decision making, under pressure? We're human. We have those core human needs, and we also have human physiological responses of what's happening in the brain when we are perceiving threat. But the good news is when we have more awareness around what's happening and why, and then we have a tool, the framework to use, pause, acknowledge, clarify, and lead, well, then we have choices here and we can choose a different outcome. And remember, we can always take a moment to separate the fear from the observable facts by taking a breath and acknowledging the fear, but choosing to focus back on that original signal. All right, so that's what I have for my part of the conversation today. And if anybody has a question, you're welcome to drop it into the chat. I do invite you to answer any of these in the chat if one of them stands out for you. One that I would like to hear is which part of the framework you think might feel hardest in real time. So you can just write the word into the chat, pause, acknowledge, clarify, lead, and I'll drop my answer. And just hang out with you here if anybody has a question. And I have another question I can share if you all are hanging tight thinking. Pause for sure. Okay, thanks, Pat. Pausing, yeah. And it makes sense, and it can maybe help us to feel a little bit better. I think we feel better when we understand ourselves. Like this is why curiosity is such a great problem solver, I like to say. If we get curious about what's happening, why we're feeling the way that we're feeling, then we can learn to give ourselves what we need. But now we know why the pause is hard, because we're under that pressure, and something's happening in the brain. It's perceiving threat, and so we're losing access to that clear, logical thinking. But then 2 minutes later, that threat detection has come down, and now I know what I wanted to say. Lead. Okay. I'm curious to hear more about that. I know you can only drop into the chat, but if you want to, no pressure, if you want to share further thoughts on that, I'd love to hear. But either way, whatever your answer is, it's good to practice that self-awareness, and when we know which step might be hardest for us, then we can prepare more for that. Okay, I've experienced this pattern with this individual before, like in my conversation the other day, and I know sort of why they can tend to react the way that they do. All right, so I don't have control over that, but I have control over myself. How can I best prepare? Last time I overrode that pause. This time, I'll listen to it, and it's just about improving. That's all that it's about. I got a question from a client recently about there's a senior leader that she consistently felt not necessarily intimidated by, but uncomfortable with. And so because she felt like he didn't approve of her or didn't like her. And so she was wanting to talk through how she can work to better cultivate that relationship. And I mentioned curiosity so that the question would be something like, how do I respond better under pressure in this type of dynamic when I feel like not approved of by a senior leader? That's an uncomfortable feeling where that stress and pressure and reaction can kind of come in, and we can lose our words. I invited her to get curious. I was curious, is there something about this senior leader? Maybe they have a project that they're working on. Maybe there's part of their role that you want to learn more about and understand more about, what's happening in their world, or with this, maybe a specific initiative. Is there anything that you're genuinely curious about? And she said, yeah, actually, he's working on this one initiative and I want to learn more about it. So there you go. When we get curious, we can shift ourselves out of that threat detection mode and then respond more intentionally. And then you can cultivate better connection just naturally. Okay, I'm just gonna hang out here for another minute and drop an invitation into the chat here. So if anybody has a question, again, no pressure or a comment, you're welcome to share. But what I'm dropping in the chat here for you are ways to stay connected. Of course, I post or share live content on LinkedIn and YouTube weekly, so you're welcome to connect with me there. You can also email me. And so this webinar is a sample of one of the full workshops that I teach. So if you're curious about coaching and or bringing a workshop to your team or organization, I put the links into the chat there on how you can connect with me. Oh, and then I'm also going to be putting together some small group workshops where not only will we focus on a specific concept or topic, then we'll actually workshop it in real time, so you can bring your situations, challenges, and then you'll get some practice and some reps in. So if you'd like to stay connected on future updates and workshops coming and things like that, you can email me always, and I'll just make myself a note to email you. And then, or if you want to stay connected, you can join my newsletter there, and I'll send a bunch of stuff, but just, here and there if I have an update. All right. Well, thank you all so much for spending some time with me today. It really means a lot, and for your participation and feedback, and feedback in the chat. And then I also wanted to say, thank you, Pat. Yay, I really appreciate it. I love feedback. So if you have any feedback on anything that could have been clearer or what was helpful, I'm always open. That helps me to improve. So I will let you all get back to your day. Really appreciate the time here. I hope you have a great day and hope to see you soon. Thanks.